Wyoming Territory, 1875. Dust settled over the town of Clearwater like a veil draped across a forgotten promise. Weston Wade gripped the saddle horn as his mare crested the hill overlooking the settlement, his 25-year-old shoulders already bearing the invisible weight of a lifetime on the frontier. The town below, barely more than a scattered collection of wooden structures clinging to the edge of civilization, represented everything he had come to believe about life in these harsh lands. Survival demanded solitude. Folks who get attached out here end up with graves to dig, he muttered to himself, adjusting the worn leather hat that shielded his tanned face from the relentless sun. His hazel eyes, sharp as a hawk's, scanned the horizon with the wariness of someone who had learned early that trust was a luxury the frontier did not afford. Weston's father had been gunned down over a land dispute when he was just 14, and his mother had succumbed to fever 2 winters later. Since then, he had built his small cattle operation through sheer determination, hiring seasonal hands, but keeping everyone at arm's length. The Rocking W Ranch was starting to prosper, but prosperity meant little when you returned each night to an empty cabin with only the howling wind for company. He nudged his horse forward, his lean frame moving with the natural grace of a man who had spent most of his life in the saddle. Several townspeople nodded respectfully as he rode past. Weston had earned a reputation as fair but formidable, a man who would help a neighbor in need, but who never lingered for the coffee afterward. His handsome features, which might have made him the target of matchmaking mothers throughout the territory, were rendered unapproachable by the cool detachment in his eyes. "Wade, thought you weren't coming to town until next week," called Jeremiah Foster, the aging shopkeeper, from his porch. "Supply wagons delayed," Weston answered, dismounting in front of the general store. "Need to stock up before the weather turns." What he didn't say was how the walls of his ranch house had started closing in lately, how the silence had grown from companion to tormentor. 25 was too young to feel this old, but he had convinced himself it was the price of survival. Attachments meant vulnerability, and vulnerability got you killed in Wyoming Territory. Inside Foster's store, Weston methodically filled his list: flour, coffee, ammunition, a new shirt to replace one torn beyond his limited mending abilities. The store was empty save for a young woman he had never seen before, standing near the fabric bolts with her back to him. "Got any of those peppermint sticks left?" he asked Foster, who was tallying Weston's purchases. Before Foster could answer, a crash from the back room startled them all. Foster's wife called out in distress, and the shopkeeper hurried toward the sound. "Mind the counter, Naomi," he called to the young woman by the fabrics. She turned then, and Weston's practiced indifference faltered. Not because she was a conventional beauty, though her deep brown eyes held a quiet intensity that caught him off guard, but because of the map of small burn scars that traced from her right temple down her cheek, disappearing beneath the high collar of her modest blue dress. She was young, perhaps 21 or 22, with dark hair neatly braided and pinned, and she carried herself with a quiet dignity that seemed at odds with the obvious hardship written on her face. "Can I help you finish your orders, sir?" she asked, approaching the counter with hesitant steps. "Just waiting on the tally," Weston replied, suddenly uncomfortable with the way she avoided his gaze, as if expecting judgment. A loud crash from the back room followed by Foster's colorful cursing suggested the shopkeeper would be occupied for some time. "I can calculate your purchases," she offered, glancing at the paper where Foster had been writing. "I help with the accounting." Weston nodded, watching as her slender fingers moved confidently across the page, adding figures with impressive speed. He noted the care with which she handled each item, the gentle efficiency of her movements. "You're new to Clearwater," he stated rather than asked. "Yes, sir. Arrived 3 weeks ago on the eastbound stage. I'm Naomi Harlow." Her voice was soft but clear, like water over smooth stones. "Mr. and Mrs. Foster were kind enough to take me in. I'm helping in the store until I can establish myself. Weston Wade. I run the Rocking W, north of town." She nodded. "I've heard your name mentioned. You have a reputation for fair dealing." She finally looked directly at him, and there was something in her gaze that suggested she had already learned to measure people carefully. "That will be $3.42, Mr. Wade." As he counted out the money, their fingers brushed briefly. She withdrew her hand as if burned, then visibly composed herself. "Foster mentioned needing help," Weston said, surprising himself. He typically kept conversations to a bare minimum in town. Ranch is growing. Might need someone to cook for the hands come roundup time. The offer came from nowhere. He had managed with trail cooks and his own limited skills for years. Yet something about her careful dignity, the way she held herself against whatever storms had marked her face and brought her to this remote outpost, stirred something he had thought long dormant. Naomi's expression flickered with hope before settling into careful neutrality. I appreciate the consideration, Mr. Wade, but I suspect you'd do better with someone else. She gathered his purchases, wrapping them efficiently in brown paper. I've learned most men prefer someone more pleasing to look at across the breakfast table. Before he could respond, Foster returned, apologizing for the disruption. A shelf had collapsed in the storeroom. Weston gathered his supplies, nodded a farewell, and stepped back into the harsh sunlight, oddly unsettled by the encounter. 3 days later, disaster struck the rocking W. A lightning storm ignited a grass fire that threatened the ranch's northern pastures. Weston and his 3 hands fought desperately to control the blaze, digging fire breaks and beating back flames with wet blankets. By dawn, they had saved the cattle and buildings, but the bunkhouse kitchen was a charred ruin, and 2 of his men had suffered burns requiring medical attention. Exhausted and smoke-stained, Weston rode into Clearwater seeking the doctor. As he waited on Doc Miller's porch while the physician tended his men, Naomi Harlow approached carrying a basket. "Mr. Foster mentioned there was trouble at your ranch," she said, handing him the basket. "I thought your men might need something substantial to eat." The aroma of fresh bread and stew rose from beneath the cloth covering, making Weston suddenly aware he hadn't eaten in nearly 24 hours. "Much appreciated, Miss Harlow." He accepted the basket, noticing the careful way she had wrapped everything, the neatness of her offering. "The men will be grateful." She hesitated, then spoke with quiet determination. "Mr. Wade, I understand you suffered damage to your kitchen. If your offer of employment still stands, I would like to accept." Weston studied her. The sunlight illuminated the pattern of scars on her face, no longer shocking to him, but speaking of a resilience he recognized. "It's hard work, Miss Harlow. Ranch life isn't gentle." A smile touched her lips, transforming her face. "With respect, Mr. Wade, I haven't encountered much gentleness in this world, but I know how to work, how to cook, and how to mind my place." Something in her quiet fortitude cracked through his practiced detachment. "Can you start tomorrow? I'll send a wagon for you and your belongings. I'll be ready at first light." She nodded, then added with unexpected frankness, "I should warn you, though. I ain't pretty, sir, but I can cook." The simple, honest assessment, devoid of self-pity or artifice, stirred something in Weston's chest, a warmth he had not allowed himself to feel in years. "We'll see you at dawn, then." As she walked away, her blue dress bright against the dusty street, Weston found himself watching her retreating figure with unexpected interest. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt curiosity about another person's story, and an inexplicable urge to be worthy of the trust she had placed in him by accepting his offer. True to her word, Naomi was waiting on the Foster's porch when Weston's wagon arrived the next morning. Her possessions amounted to 1 trunk and a small carpet bag. She climbed aboard with minimal assistance, settling beside him with a determined set to her jaw. "The ranch is about 10 miles north," Weston explained as they left town behind. "It's nothing grand. Main house, bunkhouse for the hands, barn, and corrals. Kitchen's separate from the main house, but connected by a covered walkway. At least, it was before the fire." "I'm sure I'll manage," she replied, her eyes taking in the landscape with evident appreciation. "It's beautiful country. Harsh, though," he cautioned. "Winters are brutal. Summer's not much kinder." She turned those deep brown eyes toward him, a hint of wry amusement softening her features. "Mr. Wade, I suspect you're trying to warn me off. Rest assured, I'm no stranger to hardship." "Not warning you off," he corrected, suddenly aware of how his habitual pessimism might sound. "Just being honest about what you're riding into." "Honesty I appreciate," she said. "It's far preferable to pretty falsehoods." The remainder of the journey passed in companionable silence. When the ranch buildings came into view, the whitewashed main house modest but solid, smoke rising from the partially damaged kitchen, Naomi straightened her shoulders as if preparing for battle. The three ranch hands emerged from the bunkhouse as the wagon approached, curiosity evident on their weathered faces. Weston made brief introductions. Jim Talbot, the oldest at 40, Santos Oliveira, who had been with Weston since the beginning, and young Caleb Finch, barely 20 with bandages still wrapped around his hands from the fire. Miss Harlow will be taking over kitchen duties, Weston announced. She'll need help rebuilding what was damaged. Yes, boss, Santos nodded, his eyes respectfully averted from Naomi's scarred face. We can have it right in a couple of days. Naomi surveyed the burned-out section of the kitchen building with a practical eye. I can work around it while repairs are being made. If someone could carry my trunk to wherever I'll be sleeping, I'd like to get started on a proper meal for supper. Weston showed her to a small room off the main house, originally intended as a sewing room but never used. It's not much, but it offers privacy. It's more than adequate, she assured him, removing her bonnet to reveal the full glory of her dark hair, nearly black in the dim light of the room. Thank you, Mr. Wade. Weston, he corrected impulsively. If you're going to be feeding us, seems we should be on a first-name basis. She nodded, a small smile touching her lips. Weston, then. And I'm Naomi. That evening, the men of the Rocking W gathered around the dining table for the first time in years. Usually, they ate in shifts or standing over the stove, but Naomi had insisted on serving a proper meal. Despite the limitations of the fire-damaged kitchen, she had produced a feast of tender beef stew, fresh biscuits, and an apple cobbler that left the men speechless. Miss Naomi, young Caleb ventured, his bandaged hands awkwardly holding his spoon. This here's the best meal I've had since leaving my mama's table in Missouri. Naomi smiled, the expression transforming her face in a way that made Weston inexplicably pleased. Thank you, Caleb. It's nice to cook for people who appreciate it. Where'd you learn to cook like this? Jim asked between mouthfuls. A shadow passed across Naomi's features. I worked in a hotel restaurant back east for several years. Before that, I helped in my father's boarding house. Weston noticed how she deflected the question without truly answering it, but he respected her privacy. The frontier was full of people reinventing themselves, running from pasts best left buried. As spring advanced toward summer, Naomi became an indispensable part of ranch life. The kitchen was repaired and improved under her direction, with a larger window to capture the morning light and shelves built to her specifications. She planted a small vegetable garden, coaxing growth from the hardscrabble Wyoming soil through sheer determination. More surprising to Weston was how she transformed the rhythm of life at the Rocking W. Meals became occasions for conversation rather than mere refueling. The house, long neglected beyond basic cleanliness, took on touches of comfort. Wildflowers in tin cans on the table, curtains fashioned from flour sacks, a braided rug before the hearth. Weston found himself lingering over coffee in the mornings, watching as Naomi moved efficiently through her tasks, humming quietly to herself. She never complained about the long hours or hard work, treating each day as if it were a gift rather than a burden. One evening in late June, Weston returned from checking the north pasture to find Naomi sitting alone on the porch steps, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains with fire and gold. Her hair was loose for once, cascading down her back in dark waves, and the sight stopped him in his tracks. Everything all right? He asked, approaching carefully, not wanting to intrude on her solitude. She smiled, making room for him on the step. Just enjoying the view. We never had horizons like this back east. Where exactly is back east? He ventured, the question that had been lingering for weeks finally finding voice. Naomi was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Pennsylvania, originally, she finally said. Then Ohio. Chicago after that. St. Louis most recently. She traced a finger absently along the scars on her cheek. I've been moving west for some time now. Running from something? The question was blunt, but his tone held no judgment. Not anymore, she replied with quiet dignity. Just looking for somewhere I might belong. The admission hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Weston found himself wanting to offer reassurance, but caught himself. What right did he have to promise belonging when he had spent years ensuring he belonged nowhere and to no one? The ranch is better for having you here, he said instead, the closest to sentiment he could manage. Her smile was worth his discomfort. Thank you for saying so. July brought the cattle drive to summer pastures. leaving Naomi alone at the ranch with only Caleb, whose hands were still healing, for protection. Weston found himself distracted with worry throughout the drive, checking the sky for signs of storms that might endanger the ranch, pushing the men to move faster so they could return sooner. "Boss seems mighty concerned about getting back," Santos observed on the third night, as they sat around the campfire. "Never seen him so antsy during a drive before." "Probably worried about leaving the new cook with just the kid," Jim suggested, but the knowing look he sent Weston across the flames held more insight than his words. Weston ignored the comment, but later that night, lying under the vast Wyoming sky, he admitted to himself what he had been avoiding for weeks. Naomi Harlow had slipped past his defenses, bringing warmth to corners of his heart he had thought permanently frozen. The realization terrified him. Caring meant vulnerability. Vulnerability meant inevitable pain. They returned to find the ranch in perfect order, with Naomi and Caleb having managed admirably in their absence. But the town gossip Jim brought back from a supply run a week later shattered the peaceful routine Weston had begun to cherish. Stranger in town asking questions about a woman matching Miss Naomi's description, Jim reported grimly. "Flashy type. City clothes, fancy watch. Says he's looking for his wife." The words hit Weston like a physical blow. "Wife?" Jim nodded. "Says she ran off with family heirlooms. Has papers claiming they're legally married. Name of Edmund Harrison." That evening, when the hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Weston found Naomi in the kitchen, kneading dough for the next morning's bread. The familiar, rhythmic motion of her hands had become one of his favorite sights, representing the quiet stability she had brought to his life. "There's a man in town looking for you," he said without preamble, watching her reaction closely. Her hands stilled, knuckles white in the dough. "Edmund. He says you're his wife." She turned to face him, fear and defiance warring in her expression. "By law, yes. Though I've not considered myself his wife since the night he held my face to the cook stove when I suggested we might postpone having children until his gambling debts were paid." The stark statement hung in the air between them. Weston's gaze fell to the scars on her cheek, understanding dawning with sickening clarity. "These scars." "Yes," she confirmed quietly. "That was his farewell gift before I fled. I took his mother's silver to fund my escape. Not my proudest moment, but I was desperate." "Did you go to the law?" Bitter laughter escaped her. "Edmund is the law in his town. His uncle is the judge, his cousin the sheriff." There was nowhere to turn. Weston's hands curled into fists at his sides. "I'll send him on his way." "He won't go easily," she warned, real fear evident in her voice. "He considers me his property. The silver is just his excuse. It's the humiliation of my leaving that truly drives him." "You're not going back to him," Weston stated with quiet conviction. "Not while I'm breathing." Tears welled in her eyes. "I never meant to bring trouble to your door, Weston. I'll pack my things tonight. If I move on, he'll follow." "No," he said, surprising himself with the vehemence of his response. "This is your home now. We'll face him together." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. But when Weston impulsively reached for her flour-dusted hand, she didn't pull away. Edmund Harrison arrived at the Rocking W 2 days later, riding a fine bay gelding that looked out of place against the working ranch backdrop. He was handsome in the conventional way of wealthy men who have never known physical hardship. Well-tailored clothes, manicured hands, a confident smile that didn't reach his cold eyes. Weston met him in the yard, positioned deliberately between the visitor and the house where Naomi remained inside. "Mr. Wade." Harrison greeted him with artificial warmth. "I understand you've been harboring my wife." "No man's wife works at this ranch," Weston replied evenly. "Just a fine cook named Miss Harlow." Harrison's smile tightened. "Her name is Mrs. Edmund Harrison, and she belongs at my side. She's taken ill, you see. Mental confusion. Took valuable family heirlooms and fled during an episode of hysteria. Her doctors have been most concerned." The smooth lies turned Weston's stomach. "Seems perfectly sound of mind to me. And those burns on her face didn't come from any illness." Harrison's facade cracked, just slightly. "What happens between husband and wife is private business. I've come to collect what's mine, both the woman and my property." "I'm afraid I can't help you," Weston said, aware of Santos and Jim casually emerging from the barn behind him, rifles held loosely but visibly. "Miss Harlow is an employee of this ranch, free to stay or go as she pleases. And she doesn't please to see you. Harrison's hand drifted toward his coat, where a pistol likely waited. I have the law on my side, rancher. Papers signed by a judge. This is Wyoming Territory, Harrison. Your eastern judge doesn't carry much weight out here. I could return with the territorial marshal, Harrison threatened. You could, Weston agreed. And Miss Harlow could tell him exactly how she got those scars. Folks out here take a dim view of men who burn women's faces, no matter what papers they wave around. Harrison's composure slipped further, ugliness seeping through. She is my wife. Not anymore. The new voice drew all eyes to the porch, where Naomi stood with quiet dignity, her scarred face held high. She descended the steps slowly, stopping at Weston's side. "Hello, Edmund," she said, her voice steady despite the slight tremor Weston could feel as her shoulder brushed his. "I'm not going back with you. Naomi, darling." Harrison's tone shifted to honeyed persuasion. "You're not thinking clearly. Remember what the doctor said about your condition? You need care, supervision." "I need freedom from fear," she corrected. "I need never to wonder if disagreeing with you will end with more scars. I need never to be your property again." Harrison's mask fell away entirely, revealing the cruel man beneath. "You worthless, ungrateful bitch. After everything I provided, that's enough." Weston cut in, his voice deadly quiet. "You've had your say. Now ride out before I forget my manners." "This isn't over," Harrison snarled. "No woman makes a fool of me and gets away with it. I'll be back with authority even your guns can't dismiss." "And we'll be waiting," Weston assured him. "But understand this. She stays or goes by her choice alone. You lay a hand on her, you'll be leaving horizontal." Harrison's gaze darted between the armed ranch hands, Weston's resolute stance, and Naomi's unflinching determination. With a curse, he wheeled his horse around and galloped toward town, dust rising in his wake. As the tension broke, Naomi swayed slightly beside him. Weston steadied her with a hand at her elbow, concerned by the pallor of her face. "He'll be back," she whispered. "With men, with papers. He doesn't give up what he considers his." "We'll figure something out," Weston promised. "For now, let's get you inside." That night, after the ranch had settled into uneasy quiet, Weston found himself unable to sleep. The encounter with Harrison had awakened something fierce and protective within him, feelings he had denied for too long. For years, he had convinced himself that caring led only to pain, that attachments were liabilities on the frontier. Yet in trying to protect himself from loss, he had lost something far more valuable, the chance to truly live rather than merely survive. A soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Naomi stood in the hallway, a shawl wrapped around her nightdress, her dark hair in a simple braid over one shoulder. "I couldn't sleep," she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "May I come in? Just to talk?" He nodded, suddenly acutely aware of his own state of undress, just trousers hastily pulled on at her knock. She sat carefully on the edge of the only chair, while he perched on the bed, the small room intimate in the lamp's low glow. "I've been thinking about Edmund's threat," she said. "He's right about one thing. Legally, I am still his wife. My word against his won't stand in court, especially once he bribes the right officials. I won't let him take you," Weston stated firmly. Her smile was sad. "You can't stop the law, Weston. Not permanently. And I won't risk you or the others being hurt trying to protect me." "What are you saying?" "I need to disappear. Move farther west, maybe to California or Oregon. Somewhere he can't easily follow." The thought of her leaving created a physical ache in Weston's chest. There has to be another way. She looked down at her hands, twisted together in her lap. "There is one solution, but I couldn't ask it of you." "Ask what?" "In some territories, a woman can obtain divorce on grounds of cruelty if she has a male relative to testify on her behalf, or if she has remarried and her new husband petitions for her." She rushed on before he could respond. "I would never suggest such a thing except as a temporary measure. Once the divorce is granted, we could quietly end the arrangement." Weston stared at her, understanding dawning slowly. "You're suggesting we marry?" "As a legal protection only," she clarified quickly. "I would continue as your cook, nothing more. Once Edmund is legally prevented from claiming me, we could dissolve the union with no one the wiser." The practical proposal, delivered with such careful detachment, struck Weston as both heartbreaking and absurd. This remarkable woman, who had brought light and warmth back into his life, was offering to bind herself to him in name only, then set him free from the obligation. "No," he said finally. Her face fell, shoulders slumping in defeat. "I understand." It was presumptuous to even suggest. "No," he interrupted, moving to kneel before her chair, taking her cold hands in his. "I mean, no, I won't marry you as a temporary legal maneuver." Tears welled in her eyes. "Then I should leave at first light. If I hurry." "Naomi," he said gently, "I'm saying I won't marry you only to divorce you later. If we marry, it will be because I want you as my wife in truth, not just on paper." She stared at him in disbelief. "You cannot mean that. You know what I am. Damaged, scarred, hunted." "I know exactly who you are," he corrected. "Brave enough to flee a monster. Strong enough to build a new life. Kind enough to bring warmth to a place that had forgotten what it meant to be a home." His hand rose to gently trace the scars on her cheek. "These don't make you less. They show your courage." "Weston," she whispered, leaning into his touch. "Are you certain?" "I never dared hope. I've been alone most of my life," he confessed. "Convinced myself it was safer that way. Then you arrived and showed me how empty that safety was." He smiled, suddenly shy despite his bold words. "I'm not offering marriage as a solution to your problem, Naomi. I'm offering it because I love you." The words, never before spoken to any woman, felt both terrifying and liberating. Naomi's eyes widened, tears spilling freely now. "I love you too," she admitted. "From that first day when you looked at me, really looked at me, without flinching from these scars. When you saw me, not just what had been done to me." When he kissed her, it was gentle, a promise rather than a demand. Her arms slipped around his neck, holding him close as if afraid he might disappear. "Marry me," he murmured against her lips. "Not for protection, though I'll protect you with my life. Marry me because together, we're stronger than either of us alone." "Yes," she breathed. "Yes." They were married 2 days later by the circuit preacher who fortuitously arrived in Clearwater that week. The ceremony was simple, attended by the ranch hands and the Fosters, who had championed Naomi from the beginning. She wore a blue dress, new fabric Weston had secretly asked Mrs. Foster to purchase, with wildflowers in her hair. Edmund Harrison returned as promised, a week later, with papers from a territorial judge demanding his mentally unstable wife be surrendered to his custody. His smug confidence collapsed when confronted with Naomi's marriage certificate and the signed statements from town citizens attesting to Harrison's threats and the visible evidence of his past cruelty. "No court will recognize this hasty marriage," Harrison blustered to the town sheriff. "It's obviously a ploy to thwart justice." "Maybe so," Sheriff Miller replied, unimpressed. "But I've known Weston Wade since he was a boy. If he says the lady is his wife, that's good enough for me. Now, unless you want to be charged with making threats against Mrs. Wade, I suggest you return east and file whatever papers you want with your friendly judge." Harrison departed, vowing legal retribution that never materialized. Perhaps he recognized the futility of pursuing a woman so clearly protected by her new community, or perhaps his own checkered past made him reluctant to invite too much official scrutiny. As summer turned to fall, the Rocking W thrived under the care of its newly expanded family. Weston expanded the main house, adding rooms that might someday echo with children's laughter. Naomi's kitchen became the heart of the ranch, where hands and neighbors alike gathered for meals and companionship. On their first Christmas Eve as husband and wife, as snow blanketed the ranch in peaceful white, Weston presented Naomi with a small wooden box. "What's this?" she asked, opening it carefully to reveal a delicate silver brush and mirror set. "Something beautiful, for the most beautiful woman I know," he said, watching her face light with wonder. "Weston, it's too fine for everyday use," she protested, though her fingers caressed the silver reverently. "Nothing's too fine for you," he insisted. "And it's not just a gift, it's a promise that you'll never have to run again. This is your home, forever." She set aside the box to wrap her arms around him, her face, scars and all, radiantly happy. "I never thought I'd find this," she whispered. "Someone who sees me, truly sees me." "I see you," he assured her, holding her close as the Wyoming wind sang around their sturdy home. "And I thank God every day that you found your way here." Outside, snow continued to fall on the Rocking W. blanketing the land in pristine white, not erasing the past, but offering the promise of new beginnings. Inside, warmed by love neither had believed possible, Weston and Naomi Wade faced the future together, their lonely days finally, blessedly behind them.